Welcome to GolfWRX. Chris Voshall of Mizuno Golf. Chris, how are you today?
I'm doing great. How are you doing, Ryan?
I'm doing good. It's been a busy few weeks. There's a lot going on. There's a lot of stuff going on in the golf industry, and it's been very busy. It's one of the things we just didn't necessarily expect, but we hoped for, and we've kind of really seen this exponential growth in just rounds played and the discussion around equipment, new and old. But today we're here to talk about new.
Yeah, absolutely. It's amazing. You talk about the exponential growth. Just the numbers that are coming out in not only rounds played, but equipment sales, everything are astonishing. So yeah, if you had asked us 6 months ago what we'd be talking about right now, we might say a lot of closeout product, but that's not the case at all. So we're excited about showing off all the new stuff and talking to you about it.
So speaking of new stuff, let's dive right into the new irons, because you just released the newest JPX series, the 921. I have been a big fan of JPX. I actually played the Hot Metal Pros last year, which I loved. And how that line has changed from just a couple of years ago or a few years ago now when it was first introduced to where it has come today. Well, I mean the modern series. I know JPX has been around for now 10 years.
Yeah, so I mean, it depends on how far back you want to look in terms of how far the evolution has come. So if you go back to the start of JPX, it was amazing how it just started out. It was two products. It was the JPX 800 and what was then the JPX 800 Pro. It evolved to the Pro turned into the Forged because we added a Tour on top of that. And then this last go round with the 919s, we added the Hot Metal Pro, which you said you played. So it's been a really cool thing to see how the JPX line has evolved from what started as kind of game improvement golf clubs to now just really where Mizuno tests out and tries out a lot of the technological advancements, like some of the things that aren't quite, I don't know if the word is, aren't quite proven enough for MP yet, but some things that we can test out and really try out to just advance golf club manufacturing as a whole. So with the new 921 line, we've got 4 models. We've got the 921 Tour, the 921 Forged, the 921 Hot Metal, and the 921 Hot Metal Pro, each of which is a replacement of the previous, but each of which had its own unique thing that we tried to design different from the previous.
Yeah, and if you go back, like I remember the MX series, which was before, and things like the MX 300, which was like the first kind of foray into like a larger forged golf club, but still utilizing grain flow forging. So it had the shape and the profile of a larger golf club. It had the MOI of a larger golf club, but it didn't have the technology that would have, created a lot of extra ball speed compared to, say, clubs in the category at the time. But it still offered that MP player something that was a little bit more forgiving, which I think, as someone who was working in the industry, like selling a lot of golf clubs at the time, that to me was like the core idea of that golf club. Moving into the 825 Tour, and 850 Tour are clubs that when people ask me if I'm looking for a forged golf club, we're looking for a great value, I still send people in that direction if they can find them. Because it is such a good product that happens to work for a lot of players. And you're not going to get the ball speed or the forgiveness out of something that is newer, but it still offers great value because there has been this constant evolution within the line to where we are today, which is a tour level product that can be played by low handicaps, a forged product which can be played by almost any level of golfer. Got the Hot Metal Pro, which you mentioned, and then the long irons, which you've seen like very popular on tour as well. And then the Hot Metal, which a lot of people, players' irons get a lot of attention, kind of like supercars, but family sedans sell a lot more than supercars. And in reality, the Hot Metal is the one that, I think makes up what a lot of golfers are really actually going to play or work into.
For sure. And you see that all the time with our lineup of a player thinks they want one golf club or thinks they want one particular model, but then our biggest goal, and you'll see it from how we talk about our line, how we display it on our website, how we talk about it on social media. Our goal is to not say, hey, look at this new one model, this is for everybody. Our goal is to say, look at our lineup and then get you to a fitting cart, get you to a fitter, and then see where you land from there, because you could land somewhere totally different than where you think you could land, and you could land with half the clubs of the set you thought and then another half from another set. So it's really interesting how how the marketing and how we push it has changed and evolved just to try to make sense of the 4 different models and make sense of which players fit into which one.
So you made a good point. So it's going to work into like my first question there. I think it's like we've had this discussion before. I think you're the third time guest on the show, which would be, I guess, the record at this point.
Nice. The Alec Baldwin of the podcast, right?
Yes, exactly. So with that in mind, when it comes to building sets and families of sets, like the JPX family of irons, just like the MP family of irons, they're designed to obviously blend and transition from one to another with a certain amount of understanding that you can go from one club to the other. How much of that factors in from the original concept of design to creating the final product?
So when we're creating, and I'll answer that by kind of going all the way back to when we very first start a project. We'll have a whole load of goals in terms of where it lives within the market, in terms of, what price point are we trying to hit, what handicap level, what technologies are we going to bring in. But equally important to that is how does it fit into the fitting world? So not only how can you custom fit it, but how can you mix it within our set? Because everything we do, like I said right off the bat, is everything is mixed off, or everything's based off of how it fits in our fit cart. So with every part of the design, you see it a ton on the MP side and even more than you used to on the JPX side. We're trying to make sure that everything can flow properly, and that allows you to do a lot of fun things. Because, I mean, I'll speak, for example, like the JPX Forged model. If the goal was to sell everybody who bought a JPX Forged 7-iron, if the goal was to sell them a pitching wedge through a 4-iron, then you design that set a lot different than if you were designing it to say, let's see which ones fit you best and let's see how we can mix and match. By that, I mean, everybody would have smaller scoring irons. Every set would get pretty big and pretty offset in the long irons, just because when you get stronger lofts, you need playability. But the fact that we really encourage that comboing, that mixing, bringing in a hot metal pro or bringing in a hot metal on top of a forge or tour set, means that we can bring the forge set and let it live in its own world, let the tour live in its own world in terms of head size, and then let you decide where the dots connect. And where that becomes valuable is for something like a forge. So if you're talking about who's going to play a JPX921 Forge 7-iron, that person likely might play a JPX Hot Metal or Hot Metal Pro 4-iron. But if you're talking about who plays a JPX921 Tour 7-iron, that person may likely play a forged long iron. So it's really cool because everything is designed to be mixed and matched. Obviously, the loft and offset becomes a conversation, and that's our job as WRX, as Mizuno, to educate you in terms of how you combo those. But they're really designed to be mixed and matched from top to bottom.
And yeah, I think that's a good way to talk about it, because it is a huge fitting element. And I think, although there is still a lot of people going out and buying off the rack or buying something because they hit it from a friend or whatever, and that happens all the time. And I'd say most of the time you're going to get 85% of the way there if you've hit it outside and you really like it. I understand that. But for those looking for ultimate performance and the ultimate combination and fine tuning of their golf game, it's like, I always use a suit analogy. You can go in and buy a generic suit. You can get a suit and get it tailored, or you can go in and get a bespoke suit. And if you're going out and if you've tried something and you're probably going to get that tailored suit, but if you really want to get absolutely everything out of it, you're going to get a bespoke suit and you're going to look like $1 million. And hopefully you're, in that sense, from a golf club perspective, you're going to score better as well.
Totally.
Now, how much does I know you guys have done a lot with the shaft optimizer. What is the percentage of your, say, sold sets of fitted versus things that are sold off the rack or into pro shops that people just buy?
You see it every single year where it becomes more and more fitted. And, when I first started with Mizuno, which was 2004, I'd say I think we were a little bit ahead of the game. Us and Ping, I think, were early adopters to the fitting world and got really behind it really early. And back then we were, call it 60-40 stock to custom. And then every single year you see it become more custom, more custom, more custom, more custom. 2019, I think we were close, really close to 80% of our golf clubs sold were custom golf clubs. You know, that does so many things for, you know, if you want to look at the industry as a whole, like in everything, it helps the customer because they're getting a golf club that fits them better. They're going to score better. It helps the retailer because the retailer doesn't have to keep as many on the wall. You know, then it lands on us in terms of being able to build on time, build quickly, turn it around, build accurately, and just have the options available. So our goal, if we could sell 100% fitted golf clubs, that would be awesome. But not everybody buys like that, just because you know, you'll have some people who have gone through a fitting, are very happy with what they got fitted into, and say, all right, I know I'm one up. I know I'm a Dynamic Gold AMT S300. I know I play this shaft, this length, whatever. So we want to encourage fitting at some form or another, but we really want to make sure that as many people as possible are getting fit.
Yeah, and we see that. I could compare my own experience, like retail around 2005, 2006. I was still working in like a big box retail space, and our back room, which was like the room beyond, which we kind of called it. You'd walk into it, there was head covers everywhere, and there was just racks and racks of box golf clubs.
Yep.
Someone would come in, you talk them to a set, they'd hit some golf clubs, and then they'd find one that works the best. Maybe we tweak Lyre Loft or something, or we do like an upsell on grips. You know, it's not gonna sit here and sugarcoat. That's what you do. If someone didn't like it, you know, you maybe give them a deal on some grips. You do some Lyre Lofts, and they're at the store with their box of golf clubs in an hour. They come back the next day and get them. Nowadays, you walk to a retail store; those rooms are almost gone. There's maybe one set on the wall. There maybe be another set in the back, just like as another option. But other than that, everything's directed to the fit cart. Everything's directed to the fitting area. And I think golfers at the end of the day are benefiting from that. You know, you might have to wait a couple weeks for your golf clubs, but you're getting something that's better already.
You're exactly right. And that's the whole thing, is what's the threshold of how long somebody wants to wait when they're making a purchase? So that's where obviously COVID's turned some things around and put some delays on everybody. But in general, Mizuno Golf USA works on 2 business days. Once we get the order, it's out the door in 2 business days. We're a little behind that right now just because we're playing some catch up. But if you told somebody you can buy this one right here, or 2 days from now we can ship you one that's really dialed in for you, doesn't cost any extra. There's no reason not to do that.
And in many cases, it costs less, because if it's a 7-piece set on the wall and someone only needs 5 pieces, that's a great way that someone's going to say, oh, well, yeah, no one to buy golf clubs you're not going to use. And that was always my tactic when people were looking at stuff on the wall at a retail store. You're like, you know, you could buy one less of these golf clubs and it would cost the same, like it would cost less and you get exactly what you want. You just got to wait a little bit. And generally now, as you say, that the time to wait is not that long. Now, the one club I really wanted to talk about is because I want to you and your position within Mizuno and your career has, you know, started from, like, I guess, test engineer,
correct,
to where you are now, right? And we've had that discussion. So if people are listening, you can go back and listen to those discussions on our GolfWRX radio network. You can find them on the On Spec podcast. But with the Forged is a perfect example of constant evolution from something that was, say, a little bit longer heel toe, more square to fit into the line from like an 850 perspective, to now where it is the 921 Forged it's a lot smaller, it's a lot more compact. And within this smaller golf club, you've got more technology than has ever been in that line of clubs.
You're exactly right. I mean, that's to look at where that club started. So I'll just go all the way back to you can even trace that one back really to MX20, MX23, MX25, MX200, which were all one-piece grain flow forged with an extra level of forgiveness. So some sort of, we call it like post-processing that happens after the forging to make it more forgiving. So again, go back 15 years, the MX23 was a fantastic golf club. We sold a lot of those. It was a golf club that was forged, gave you good feel, but had a good amount of forgiveness built into it. Going into the JPX line, when the MX kind of transitioned to JPX with the JPX 800 Pro, that had it was a 1025 forging, so one piece forging, but instead of milling a pocket cavity, what we actually did is we milled an area to expand the rebound area. And that was the first time we had actually tried to push the COR. We had tried to push the ball speed aspect of it. And that was the shift from just make it more forgiving to make it more forgiving and hotter. And then that's the evolution that you've seen that JPX Forge model make from year after year. So from the 800 to the 825 Pro, a small evolution, to the 850, we introduced a boron material. Boron material was able to allow us to go even thinner to make it more forgiving and make it even hotter. And then we went to our back milling on our JPX 900 and 919 line. And now with the 921, we actually changed material again to try to unlock even more speed out of it. So we went from a 1025 boron to a chromoly 4120 material. So it's a stronger material, still forged, but we're able to go even thinner, get faster, get hotter. So just from the start of that golf club to where it is now, in terms of ball speed and COR, it's come miles. But what's cool is what's lived around it. Because with the original ones, it lived in a world where there weren't a lot of golf clubs around it in terms of our lineup. So we had our JPX 800 cast and we had the JPX 800 Pro. But now if you look at the 921 line, there's a tour model on the lower end. There's a Hot Metal Pro on the other end. So it can live more in exactly what it wants to be. So the evolution is it's gotten more technologically advanced, but at the same time, because we've added clubs on the more forgiving side, we've actually shrunk it in size. So the 921 Forged got hotter, got faster, and got smaller, got thinner, got sleeker. So it's cool how it's really evolved in terms of like everything about the golf club, to where if you compare the 921 Forge to an MX23, they're nothing alike, even though it's the same, it's the great-great-grandfather of it.
Yeah, and I guess that it comes down to when you look at the new line and you were to compare them over generations, like you can draw a Venn diagram with like everything that exists now and kind of see how they transition from one to the other. And you really didn't see that before. Mm-hmm. And I know I wrote about that recently on our site, GolfWRX, about how that is the biggest trend we've seen from OEMs across the board, is how, it used to be, well, this is for game improvement, this is for the player, and this one is in the middle for like most people. And now most companies are offering 3 to 4 lines, but they really do transition so smoothly towards each other to allow golfers to, because not everyone needs a big super game improvement pitching wedge or 9-iron, because they might not struggle with that part of their game. But as they get to the long irons, like anyone else, they need that little extra height and spin. Actually, it's kind of funny because I think it was recently on, I don't know if you listened to it, Shotgun Start podcast. Big fan. Andy's mentioned something about how clubs and how the way they're targeted to people, and how, for most average golfers, the LPGA Tour is probably a better example of how to build a golf bag and how to transition golf clubs versus some of the pros, because just I'm not comparing handicap, I'm not comparing skill level. I don't want to get into that argument, but I've settled it many times before. But what I'm saying is, purely from a dynamic standpoint, and speed perspective, you're seeing those like transitioning into those hybrids and into those long irons, but still want that precision in the short irons. And that's where I think the women's game is so much more fascinating to really watch from an equipment side of things for regular golfers. And then when you get into the higher swing speed players, you can really see that more with the PGA Tour level guys as well. Absolutely.
I mean, the women's game, they're amazing, but their launch parameters are not as unbelievable as the guys' side. So in terms of the ball speed, the spin rates, the launch angles they can generate, translate a lot more to what people are playing and what's out there. And even then, like you look at the women's game, you see some bombers out there, and you see some really good players who aren't bombers, where it feels like on the men's tour, it's almost like the non-bombers are somewhat getting weeded out lately, is what it feels like. So in terms of setting up your bag, what they do and how they put a bag together is absolutely something that you should look at and something you should pay attention to. Ultimately, when you look at specs of golf clubs, I know you're a big time spec guy, so you respect that a ton, and what was happened with lofts and how lofts have gotten so crazy. ultimately, if a golf club is 21 degrees, it's 21 degrees. And it takes a certain amount of launch angle and spin rate to keep a 21-degree golf club in the air. You can do so much with center of gravity, but ultimately there's a speed point that needs to be brought to the table. And if you don't have that speed, then it doesn't matter what the design is, that 21 degrees isn't for you. So you should look to what's the best 21-degree golf club to get you the parameters you need.
So after a temporary technical issue, we are back. What we were discussing was the fact that talking about parameters and talking about how we see players like the example I used on the men's tour was obviously Brendan Todd recently, like not one of the longer players. One of my historically favorite players who I believe played Mizuno for a very long time was Brian Gay. Ridiculous ball striker, putted lights out, but was not necessarily like the longest guy on tour. And then you have the very different games on the LPGA tour with Stacey Lewis, who just recently won again, who's not like the longest player. And then you also have someone like Maria Fossey, who is an absolute bomber. She blasted way by me out on the golf course. So you have all these different contrasting examples of players, and you guys really do a good job of helping golfers understand how to put their sets together, which was what we were talking about, and then also how to find the right shaft with the optimizer.
Yeah, that's one of the things that's been really cool about the optimizer, where it started was simply what's the right shaft for your 6-iron, which was the fitting club at the time. How it's evolved and the data that we've collected and how much we've learned from it, it's turned into a full bag recommendation tool to now where we're measuring so many different things with the gyro that's built in, with this, with all the strain gauges and accelerometers built in. We understand how you're delivering the club to the ball. To now we can recommend what shaft you should carry, but we also can understand at what level, based off of your angle of attack, your shaft lean, how you deliver the club into the ball, where you're going to start struggling with loft. And where you start struggling with loft is where you might need to address what club goes in on the long iron side. So our shaft optimizer software is incredible how it'll recommend not only what shaft to play, but then it'll say, you also need to switch this 4-iron for a more forgiving one, or switch this 5-iron, or depending on who the player is, it'll tell you how to put that set together.
Yeah, I think that's it's cool because, you know, for like depending on the fitting, like if someone's getting fit, they're not going to maybe not have access to launch monitor, but they're able to see data outside. And that's a really smart tool, because one of the questions I get all the time, and for me when I do like Instagram questions and things like that, and I'm trying to answer bidding questions for golfers, is can I put a different shaft to my 3 or 4 iron to like launch it higher and get extra carry? And like the biggest thing I tell people is like, no. You can try, and you can get maybe a little bit of extra speed with something lighter or something that's designed to launch higher. But in reality, it comes down to what you mentioned earlier about like the club's specific loft, and how, you know, once you get to a certain loft, if you don't have the speed to create that, regardless of face technology, you're not going to get what you're probably going to get out of it. And that's one of the reasons why I always tell people, like, you know, I can recommend it and you can try it if you're interested, but I think that you should probably look at club head technology and shape and size and those kind of things to actually change your launch parameters than just focus on a simple shaft change, because how that club transitions and how it works is what's really going to help you create the proper angle of descent, and is going to help lower dispersion, because as we know, and as it's become part of the golf vernacular now, truly in the mainstream, is strokes gained and how to play and actually score better.
Absolutely. And yeah, you're right that the ultimate judge of whether you can handle a loft or not is your speed. So like, you know, a 46 degree or 47 degree pitching wedge, you could have a 50 mile an hour head speed and you can handle it, but then that falls off. So it's like, you can Band-Aid a couple of things when you're getting close to that transition area. So you could Band-Aid somebody who calls 105 mile an hour, trying to get to like a 19 or 18 degrees. Maybe you could mask something with a little bit lighter, a little bit softer kicking shaft or something like that. But ultimately, it's going to eventually, you're going to catch up. Like, not everyone could play a 1-iron. If you could mask everything with shafts and specs, everyone could play a 1-iron. And we know that's not the case.
Yeah. Speaking of that point, I've been playing some very poor golf recently, and I decided to grab my MP14 1-iron, which I have as part of the full set to take out. I brought a persimmon 3-wood and that iron just to like, try and hopefully hit the sweet spot. And with my launch monitor, I could not believe, because I hadn't done it in a very long time, and I hadn't actually taken this club to hit on my launch monitor that I got recently. I was carrying it 165 yards. Like I just could not get the height. I was like, I could have swore I would have hit this further than that. At least like I would have carried it 200 yards, even though it would have been really low. And like anything that wasn't slightly perfect, it was like 165, 170 maybe. And I thought, okay, this is silly.
I believe that. That's good on you for trying that out.
It was a good way to completely punish myself. Now, speaking of strokes gained and scoring, the other thing that I really wanted to touch on, as well as evolution and technology, are the new wedges.
Okay.
Because you've got a multi-piece, it's a forged wedge, but you're doing something from a weight shifting perspective that we've seen in wedges, but not in something that is traditionally shaped, and not in something that really looks like a club that you would expect from Mizuno. First off, let's put it that way, right? We've seen companies go out of their way to produce like very unique looking wedges designed to move mass around, but nothing that does what this does the way it does it.
Yeah, well, and it's funny, you talk about evolution and product, going from product to product. I love to tell the evolution of this story from concept to final product, because the evolution that the ES21 has taken from initial sketch and initial design goals to where the final product is, it's come a long way to an almost unrecognizable product. So the whole design goal of it was, how can we put an exact center of the score line's center of gravity? And that's something that, the average guy doesn't even realize a wedge doesn't have that. You'd think it would. You'd think all your golf clubs, if I hit it in the middle, I'm hitting the sweet spot. But the traditional design of a wedge with a long hosel, with a lot of loft on it, a relatively short heel to toe head length, the center of gravity lives significantly towards the heel, as much as 10, 15 millimeters away from the center of the score lines. So our goal was, can we make something with a dead center sweet spot? The idea behind that is, one, when you hit it in the middle, you're hitting a sweet spot, but also because the wedge is the area of the game, the short game, where you want as much consistency as possible. So with keeping your impacts as close to center and as close to the sweet spot as possible is going to minimize your dispersion. It's going to help your strokes gained. It's going to help you hit more consistent shots, get it closer to the ball, closer to the hole more often. So what started as, a really simple design goal, engineering it's difficult, because how can you move the mass 10, 15 millimeters? I mean, you talk about on a driver where it's 460 cc's, we can move it 2 or 3 millimeters, and that's still a big amount. When you're talking a head that's half the size of a driver in terms of heel to toe length and moving it 5 times as much, you got to do crazy things on it. So it started out as a golf club that did not look like something that Mizuno should produce. I'm not going to lie. Like, it was something that we were like, man, how do we even forecast this? Like, is this worth bringing out? And then as we worked with the manufacturing side, we worked with the engineering side, we kind of started to say, what if we brought this form of the construction over? What if we did this? What if we moved a couple pieces like this? What if it was 2 pieces as opposed to 1? Could that unlock some things? So ultimately we got to a golf club that, when you look at it from behind, it's still a little bit funky. It's still big and still thick. But when you look at it addressed, it's a Mizuno. Like, it looks the part. Yet what it does in terms of moving the center of gravity is something that we've never seen on a wedge from ourselves or from even some of the funky ones out there.
Now so you mentioned a good point. It was something I wanted to touch on with irons, but I think this is actually probably the better way to discuss it. It'll probably leak back into irons anyways. But when it comes to developing product or using processes to create a product or a final product, who really pushes that? Now, I know you guys have a partnership, exclusive partnership with the forging company that you work with. But do they say that you guys, like, look, we've worked with this material, we know we can forge it. Do you think there's like an application there? Because pretty sure I understand like Chuo doesn't just do golf clubs. They do like high-speed train parts and like bullet train parts and all kinds of things that need a lot of precision involved in them. So are they bringing this type of technology to you guys, or are you going to them and saying, this is what we think can happen? Because we see with shafts, a lot of shafts and a lot of materials come from the aerospace. They're making a lot more planes than they are golf shafts. Let's be real honest about that, right? So that is what's pushing golf shaft technology companies to be able to innovate. Is it silly example, but is it bullet trains pushing golf clubs, or are you going to them and really saying, let's work together on co-engineering this?
It's an interesting thing because we've had this partnership and this relationship with Chuo for so long that honestly, it's a push from both sides. So it's such a great relationship that we're developing things together. Any of the Mizuno forging patents don't just have Mizuno's name on them. They have Chuo and Mizuno, and it's the same way with both things. So in terms of, are we getting technologies from the bullet train or from the automotive side? Not as much, just because those pieces traditionally are significantly larger and don't have quite as many weight limitations that the golf club has. So it's funny if you go through the forging house and actually do a tour of it, which obviously I've been fortunate enough to do a number of times, the most experienced forgers aren't the ones making the pieces for the bullet train. It's the ones making the golf clubs, because they're the smallest, the most precise, that require the most level of like intricacy in terms of how that billet's placed in the mold and how it's worked after that. But to go in terms of how do we develop and how do we advance forging, what we'll do is, obviously from the engineering side, from the 3D world, we'll say, hey, look, our simulation said we can go 2 millimeters thinner and we can make this weight super light. But then there's the reality of it, of can you make that? So what we do is we're always pushing back and forth, where we say, you know, for example, with a 1025E Pure Select mild carbon steel, that's what we use for our MP20, our HMB, assuming not our HMB, but our MMC, our JPX Tour. We know just how thin we can get over a given area and maintain durability. So if the goal is to just maintain durability and not have it break, then we know what to do. But when you start pushing the limits of saying, well, I need the COR to be this, I need the ball speed to come off this fast, then we know, it's almost like you have to reverse engineer of, okay, if we want to get a ball speed to here, then we know that we have to have a thickness of this. And if we know we have to have a thickness of this, we need to have a material that has a durability or can withstand loads and strains of this level. So then it becomes, let's talk to Chuo, let's talk to the metallurgical side, because they've got a metallurgical team that they work with there as well, to say, what could we do to a 1025, or what could we do in terms of a chromoly material, in terms of the carbon content? How could we manipulate that to help us increase the strength or increase the malleability of it or something? So it really is a partnership where we go back and forth and we push each other. Oftentimes you'll see that the engineering side will get frustrated because we think we could have gotten a little bit thinner, but on the manufacturing side, they want to be a little bit safer. And then that's why you see and you talk about evolution, from generation to generation, sometimes with the same material, we can get more out of it because we've then proven we know how to work this material a little bit better and we can evolve it a step further. But going back to like the 921 forged, we really had gotten to the point where we couldn't get much more out of boron material in terms of COR. So that's where you have to make the change. So there's evolutions in how you develop it. There's evolutions from generation to generation. And then ultimately you have to then completely start over at some point and bring in new materials. But it works from our side and from their side.
Yeah, and we've seen it, and you touched on it exactly to the point where you get comfortable working with something, and like as an observer, right? You look at the MP20 line, and you had the forged chromoly face of the hot metal blade, and so it's like you obviously were able to forge the material. You were able to weld with it, and then it must have become, okay, now that we've been able to achieve that in this as like the test sample, and obviously there's prototypes involved, but like producing it at a scale, producing it where it's going to work and we can bend it and it's fittable and we have a product that's going to work really well. It's time to release it within this family. Okay, now we've been able to prove that point of concept. Can we forge the entire thing? Is that kind of how that works? Where you're like, okay, now we've got a proof. Now let's go to the next part where we can push it.
Absolutely. And what's funny is we tell so many stories on our golf club. Like if you just look at the back of it, you're getting half the story. If you read our hosel, we tell you so much of what's going on. So we'll say Grain Flow Forge HD, 1025E, 1025 Boron, chromoly. And what's interesting about like a chromoly material is it started in the hot metal world. So it started with a cast club, and our cast golf clubs, if you look at it, it says chromoly 4140M. So 4140M is a special makeup of chromoly that we've used that's optimized for the casting process. Then as we've brought chromoly into the MP20 line and now the JPX921 line, what you'll see is on the hot metal blade where we were only forging the face and the neck, it's a chromoly 4135. So 4135, it's a little bit softer because it needs to be softer to be able to flow into a forging mold. Even then, because the face is very flat and then there's a neck on there and then we go in and mill out or machine out the hosel, you don't have to have a ton of material flow on it. So if you look at the 921 forged, it's a chromoly 4120. So even on the hosel, it says it's a different grade of chromoly. So then it's taking it and it's saying, well, how can we use this material? What do we need to do to that material to be able to forge the entire head? So to get the sole and the cavity how we want it, it takes a different material. So it's always looking at every bit of it, of the process, of the material, of everything to try to get the performance levels.
That's yeah, I think that's very interesting. And I know when you guys had the initial teaser drop, we were looking at, I was doing the like zoom in to like look at the hosel and okay, they've got a material here. There's something going on. Cause as you say, right, your golf clubs do tell a lot of the story of what's really going on with them, right? Because people can't see inside, they don't know the material, but you guys actually put that on the outside of the golf club. Mm-hmm. Now that actually, so now to that point about the different materials, do the forging dies, do those last as long? Do they have a shorter lifespan or hit number based on, because the material is different? Is that something that factors in?
That's a great question. It does absolutely factor in, and the material really factors in how many strikes are necessary to get something to its shape. So for example, like a 1025E it's a very soft material, and that one, the forging mold's going to last the longest. The material is going to flow the best. It's going to get to its shape very easily. A chromoly 4120, it's not going to flow as easily. And because of that, the strikes wear the mold quicker. So they're going to wear out faster, and it's going to take more strikes to get it to its shape. So an interesting thing is like forging the JPX921 forged, we actually had to develop a third set of precision forging molds, which is an additional process that, you know, again, it adds time, it adds money, it adds everything to making that golf club. So traditionally what we do is we have a couple of what we call the rough forgings, the hammer presses, and then it goes through 2 rounds of precision, which is a hydraulic press. Now we actually have a third round of precision to get it to its shape. So it does, every material, every little bit of it is involved in how you manufacture it. And that's where our partnership is so valuable, because, you know, if we just walked up to we went to a random forging house and said, we want you to make this, who knows if we could get there, and who knows if we could get as much out of every material that we can. Actually, I know the answer. We couldn't. So it's something pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen the videos before. I think it's one of the cool things. I probably watch it a few times a year when I'm looking at stuff where I'm like trying to think, like, oh yeah, this is how all this stuff is really made. It's pretty fascinating to watch. So with the new line coming out, you know, how much from the design perspective goes into tour players? Because that's what I just want to kind of touch on that a little bit as well, because we've seen great success with the 900 JPX 900. Obviously won a few majors. 919 went on to win a couple more, and so you have this feedback where players are looking at it going, okay, this is what I like, this is like how it works. And you guys obviously have a lot of players that use your clubs that aren't being paid as well. Is it like a looks perspective that you're trying to achieve with tour players, so there's something they're comfortable with? Because I kind of think of it like, you know, if you work for the Corvette design team, obviously the new one is very, very different. So it's like the 921 forged of Corvettes now, right? It's a very different thing. But you know, at the end of the day, it's still gonna look like a Corvette. right? And I think that's where automotive design to me is always fascinating, kind of as a parallel to golf clubs.
Yep.
So when you take these golf clubs to tour players who are going to be very specific, are they going to say, "Oh, I like this. Can you tweak that?" Or is it you saying like, "This is how it's going to look, guys. What do you think?"
So a lot of the feedback we get from them is address shape and sole turf interaction and feel. Those are the big things we really rely on them for. What's funny is the back design, we almost try not to show them the back design. So what we do, our typical thing when we're doing a hit test is we'll hand them one and then we'll switch and we won't let them see from behind what they're doing because they don't need to understand what's going on back there. So where we really like to lean on them is head shape and turf interaction. Turf interaction being a huge one, just because it's difficult to quantify and measure a lot of things. So the player feedback of turf interaction is huge. But I'll give a perfect example of like the 921 tour. We leaned on them a lot. Not only our staff players, but our non-staff players who are playing the 900 and 919 tours as well, where we wanted to understand from them, what do you like about your current clubs? What do you wish it did different? What do you wish it did better? What does it do great? And really try to focus on each of those things.
So we were talking about tour player feedback and sole design. So I'll let you continue where you were.
Yeah, so sole design is one of those things we really lean on tour players for, just because it's one of those things it's tough to quantify. Like, we really dial in very precise measurements in terms of the camber, the bounce angles, and different parts of the sole. And we make sure those are really well, basically like designed into it. But then to get the feedback, those tour players are so good at that. So that's something we lean on them a lot for is what's their feeling of how a club enters and exits the turf, particularly on like a scoring iron of a JPX tour. Their feedback is so valuable. So we really lean on them for that. Feel, we love doing field tests with them because it's one of those things that each player's feedback is a little bit different. We know which players like softer, we know which players like firmer, and just to confirm some of the theoretical things we do, we lean on them a lot for that. And then a great example of leaning on their preference is the 921 tour. Part of the feeling was the 919 tour had lost a little bit of the workability that the JPX900 tour had. And a lot of that came from how it was weighted, where the center of gravity lived, how far towards the toe versus being a little bit shorter. So that was one thing we did. We took their feedback and said, okay, we can make this golf club a little bit more workable. So we love leaning on tour players and just getting their feedback at every stage of development.
So from a design cadence point of view, the 900 JPX 900 was obviously a very workable golf club, and then the 919 got a lot more stable on heel toe while still offering workability. And now you've offered similar stability, but I kind of worked a little bit more workability back into the product. Is that a good way to describe it then?
That's right. So, there's two ways to talk about stability. There's stability in terms of like moment of inertia, like how forgiving is it in terms of MOI, and there's stability in terms of how much control the head wants to have versus the player. And that's where typically a shorter, we call CG to shaft axis, how far the center of gravity lives from that axis determines how workable a golf club is. So that's part of why a blade is so workable, is because that CG to shaft axis is traditionally very small. So our goal for the 921 tour was to maintain or increase the MOI. So make it just as stable on off-center hits in terms of distance from the sweet spot, in terms of how much twisting there was, but make it more workable by bringing that CG to shaft axis closer. And that's what we were able to do. So it's a golf club that's very stable, meaning you'll get consistent results, but we added some more workability into it.
Yeah, so there's like the horizontal from top to bottom, vertical top to bottom, and then horizontal, but then there's also horizontal relative to the shaft, which is where the player will feel they're able to either like close the face a little bit more, or they feel like they are able to leave it open a little easier oftentimes. And I think that's the interesting point, because when it comes to like better players, when they do build those combo sets, you have people that will hit. I've heard better players say like they get a club that has a much longer heel toe length, although it's more forgiving, and they'll say, I feel like I miss it right more, even though like it's a more forgiving club. And it's like, well, that's just because relative to what you're using, it's going to have a different rate of closure,
Yep.
And all these kind of things are going to factor in. So, you know, either you make an adjustment to the club, or you have to kind of make an adjustment to your golf swing while you're going to something like that.
That's exactly right. I mean, the easiest way I like to describe it is, you know, you talk about the closure rate. You know, you've seen on drivers where you put more weight on the heel. What that does, that brings that CG closer, so it wants to close quicker. But at the same time, there's the moment about the shaft axis. And when I'm talking about that, I mean, if a golf club has a longer CG distance, it takes more force, it takes more energy to get that toe closing. So that's why some people feel like if the club is longer from heel to toe, it wants to hang out to the right. It's the closure rate, but it's also, if I want to try to turn it over, it's not as easy to, because it takes more effort. It takes more of a moment to do that.
Yeah, and we talked about it with the release of the drivers a little while ago, and how you know, the plane at which the shaft enters the head versus like upright versus, and then which will change the axis, change the center of gravity relative to the shaft on a driver, kind of does the same thing, because you have the 200X, which has a different I think entrance plane, which also has a different like line angle, and obviously head weight, all these different little, I call them, which I think a lot of people can call them like mechanisms or levers. So we're going to pull, we know that we can pull this lever to make it do this, and we're going to pull this lever to make it do this. And from 1 to 10, where are we going to place all these different levers to achieve the desired goal and have it feel and look and do all the things that we want it to do?
I think that's a great way to think about it, because you're right. I mean, it's all physics, and you can't rewrite physics. It's what physics lever are we going to pull because of a design goal that we want for each one.
Now, before we go, the one thing, or not before we go, but there's a couple more things I want to touch on quickly. We've got something really new with the Forge, like the Forge clubs in the JPX series, and that is we brought SEL to JPX.
Yes, I know that'll be good for you guys up in Canada as well. So
yeah,
so no,
the general target market is hockey players, I guess.
What's funny is, you know, there's a couple of ways of looking at how you launch left-handed golf clubs, and Mizuno, I think, has traditionally been guilty of saying, okay, this one has the highest sales volume potential. So if you look at, like, you know, and obviously that's going to live from the highest handicap golf club has the highest sales volume potential. The Muscleback has the lowest. And I think we know that in terms of how many golfers there are and who buys golf clubs. If you want to look at it strictly from a business thing, then what you'd expect from Mizuno would be, we're going to bring the 2 most forgiving golf clubs and make them left-handed and just go from there. But ultimately, the left-handed number is not going to make or break us as a company, because it is still a relatively small percentage of what we sold. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to service that market with golf clubs that we haven't brought to them in the past, or in a number of years, I should say. So we started with the MP20 SEL last year, where we hadn't made a Muscleback for the lefty in a long time. On the JPX side, the JPX Tour, we've never offered that golf club for a left-handed player. So what we wanted to try to do is offer that club, but at the same time, we want to look at what levels of playability are built into that, and how are people actually buying that set? Because a lot of people who buy that JPX Tour set are comboing that set. So we built that into a comboed set, just because we feel like you're going to get the more playability out of it, and it's probably going to fit more players, and even players who thought they wanted from top to bottom, they probably don't, and they probably don't need it. So we're trying to build a more playable set for the lefty.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point, because as we have discussed in the past, and with the 20s was a good example of the fact that, you know, you have data that shows how players combo through fitting, because 80% of your sales are through fitting. So you have that information of what's getting fit to players. So you could say, like, you know, we don't need to make a 3-iron in this set of golf clubs, because we're not really going to sell them, and we don't think that people actually should use it because of the loft and the center of gravity and all these different things, and out of options and optimizing and playing better. Probably not a great idea. I mean, there's a reason I still have an MP14 1-iron, but there's no 1-iron that you guys make anymore. So with that in mind, again, it comes down to like shaping and those kind of things. So going from left-handed back to the right-handed set, in general, is the JPX921 Tour. You have done something with that club as well. That was the first time it's really done, or you've done with the JPX model, and that is taken it to the grinding, the master craftsman that generally shape the MP line, and brought that shaping and that final hand touch to those golf clubs for even just a more refined transition club to club, and how that's going to set up behind the ball.
Yeah, so that's something that traditionally had been reserved for the MP side. And MP, what we do is we design it in 3D. We'll cut a 3D model, or basically a CNC model based off of the actual CAD design. And then we'll work with a master craftsman to grind the shape perfect. And we've done that years, for as long as I know, on an MP golf club. On a JPX or an MX back in the day, that was a step that we never really took. We would actually go just straight from 3D design to cut a mold from there. But as the JPX Tour has really evolved to be such a tour-focused golf club and such a big part of our fitting strategy and our tour strategy, we wanted to try to take it an extra step in terms of the sophistication of it. So yeah, that's a step that had never been done on a JPX model before, that we integrated to the JPX921 Tour this time. Because, you know, if you looked at our MP line in the past, it used to have a shallow cavity, a muscle back, an MMC, and all these other things. And it's like the JPX Tour is almost taken over for that shallow cavity. So with that in mind, we still wanted to speak to that player on the MP side. So I talked about looking at clubs that address with the tour. The address shape is where we touch a ton of that stuff with the master craftsman. And that's why we took that extra step with the 921 tours.
Yeah, I think it's a neat story to tell, but there's also like a visual and like a physical difference when you set it down. I think that's a big component, because I know to talk about some people who work on golf clubs like Don White from National Customs, and I've talked to Patrick many times, and I know you guys work with their ferrules as well. You did a really cool run with the Boyd Blade and ferrule stuff on the limited edition copper irons. Was how like the transition from club to club and how they look is so important. And when you get someone who knows how to shape a golf club to fit someone's eye, and obviously they're doing sets for individuals, you're fitting sets for segments, and you know that someone's going to look at it and go, that heel's a little high, or that toe's a little more rounded than we want to see. And because they're working within, we could call it, you know, the Corvette looks like a Corvette and still transitions. Like an MP club is going to look like an MP club, and a JPX is going to look like a JPX club. But it's kind of melding of the two to create something new and create something different, while also, you know, staying true to the form and the function of what it's designed to do. Absolutely.
And what the craftsmen are able to do in terms of working golf clubs and getting the shape absolutely perfect, it's really, it's something that I'm jealous of. You know, I can do whatever clicks I need to do to make it look really close to what I think I want it to look like. But to see a finished product after the craftsmen have touched it and really dialed in the hosel transition, the way the top line moves into the hosel, that's such a tricky area, because you have basically what's going from a flat coming off the top line that transitions into a perfect cylinder. And to have that look exactly organic, yet still be highly engineered and actually the exact, you know, specifications you want, it's something that the CAD and the Creo, or, you know, whether SolidWorks or whatever form you're using, it's difficult to pull off on that. And to be able to lean on a craftsman to dial that in, it's just a really cool step of like science and art combining.
I know there's the video out there, like Nick Faldo talking about Turbo doing like the hosels and things like that. And I always think of, if you ever watched a player, actually I think Nick says it as well in like one of the older videos, is that hosel to top line transition where they can get in there and you just see someone like, the way they hold their hands. And I've done a fair amount of like wedge grinding. Irons is not, I've done a few sets of irons as well, but it's not my day to day. So even like, I always try and start with the 3-iron, because I think to myself, I script the 3-iron and I'm grinding it. Well, it's a 3-iron. Someone's not going to pull that off. But when you get into those wedges and you start, you know, getting in little angles and trying to get up against the wheel, you realize how, just like a very artistic way to put it, and like maybe I'm overthrowing the analogy here, but it's like, the way you can put pressure onto the bristles of a paintbrush and create like a different texture or whatever. I'm not a painter, so that maybe is off an analogy. But either way, the pressure and the angles and all these different things make a difference. And that, you know, if someone presses a little too hard or something, then, you know, you got to go back and start with another one. But I have a feeling it doesn't happen too often with the guys you're working with.
They're really good. And what's amazing is how a golf club that has a very locked hosel, face, leading edge, top line, all of those are going to lead to one look at address. But then just how you can feather in little bits in between those, like how you can make that transition, can really affect what a player sees and feels in terms of what that club feels or looks like it's going to do at address. And Faldo is, I mean, he's known for being the best in the world at understanding that. And he's been like that his entire life, where, you know, for him to pick out a set of irons, he'll go and say, I need to see all your 4 irons. I'm going to pick the best looking one that looks to my eye like it's going to do what I want it to do. And it's amazing how just little bits of, like you said, a tiny bit of pressure just underneath the hosel, just as it's transitioning to the leading edge, can make that club look like it's going to go straight. It can make it look like it's going to go left. It can make it look like it's going to go right. Where physically it's not going to do any of those things, but ultimately it puts in here what you see that doing and helps you deliver the club to the ball better. Yeah,
I mean, we used to see it with set face hosels on drivers. I remember working in big box, kind of going back to that. If I wanted a driver, I'd put 2 or 3 down. If I knew I was going to get one, and I was like, okay, well, look, this little shot. This one's good. And I would like go hit that one, right? Just because you have that opportunity when there's 6 or 7 sitting there in the same kind of loft or whatever. But you see it as well with the MP18 Fly High. I have a couple of those. I still really like that golf club. The back of it's mirrored because you see it from address. Yep. But when you set it down, because it's mirrored, you see the turf or whatever it's on. So it kind of makes the club look a lot smaller than it really is. And that's a finish thing. That's not even like someone touching it. I mean, someone's going through the finishing process and buffing that part of the golf club or mirroring it. And the next thing you know, it appears different again. The tricks you can do in cosmetics are amazing. Like it's so funny how many times, and you see it, you talked about looking at different drivers and picking the right driver. What's funny is I bet a lot of those measured the same face angle, but the way the paint line transitions as it falls off the top, like we've gone through driver fittings where it's like, you know, all the numbers are great, but a player says, I'm not quite comfortable. It looks like it's going to hook to me. And you literally could take a razor and just take a little bit of paint off the toe. Oh, looks great. Done. Like it's amazing how much those little cosmetic things can have an effect on how a player perceives a golf club. I always think if you see like a cheaper driver, and I'm not to pick on any like major OEM, but if you go and see like a discount driver, like a house brand or something where that one's not really designing it per se, like someone is in like a foundry and like they're buying it over a model or whatever it happens to be. Yep. That transition from the top to the toe is usually very sharp. Yep. And a lot of times it's going to look very closed. And again, they're maybe appealing to their target market. That's totally fine. Right. But if I was to look at it and say, you know, it sits shut, although maybe it does sit square, and it's just because of that paint line. And even just like eye dominance and putter alignment can play such a huge role in what's going on with that. You're exactly right. If you go and look at drivers, obviously there's the face, there's the crown, there's the toe and the skirt going around. And you're right, cheap drivers, a lot of times the paint ends at the face. If you look at a Mizuno, a TaylorMade, a Titleist, a Callaway, a Cobra, a Ping, you see that the paint goes and then it falls and it sweeps this way. And it does that for a reason, because cosmetically it looks different. Yeah, it's always very interesting to like compare the two when you look at something that doesn't look right versus something that does, because, you know, you could say, oh, that toe looks sharper than the other, but then if you get them really close, you're like, oh, they're actually very similar. But right. You know, this one is very different because of the paint and the lines and the time that goes into it, and that equates to cost and all kinds of other factors. So to finish up, Chris, I really appreciate your time with all of this. Of course. I have to ask, with all these new irons coming out, any changes to your golf bag? So I'm working on that right now. So right now I've been playing T7 wedges. I've been playing 919 tour irons, and I've been playing MPH5. So actually like an older model of like the Fly High you were talking about. And I'm putting together right now a set. I've actually got, I don't know if you can see right over here, I've got all my shafts and grips right there measured out and getting ready to go. And what my plan right now is I'm going to put together some T20, basically like a pitching wedge, gap wedge, an ES21 58 degree, which I'm excited to really get out and play on the course to really see how that works.
And then I'm going to do some 919 tours. And then on the long iron side, I'm going to try to eliminate a club, because I've got a 3 and a 4 iron that are only 3 degrees apart. And I'm going to try to go to actually the lofts of our SEL irons. So what I'm going to try to do is go exactly 4 degrees everywhere. And I'm going to build my longest. I'm pretty sure I'm going to build it with an HMB, about a 1/2 inch long with a lighter shaft, which will be something different that I haven't tried. Because right now I've been playing AMT forever, which it is a lighter shaft in the 3 iron, but I'm talking going to like a 85 gram graphite or something to try that. So I'm excited to try it and to get out. And I know a lot of people are playing a lot of golf right now, and I know I have. So I'm excited to get out and take it to the course.
Yeah, I know it's always fun to like build a new golf bag and go through that transition period. And we see that with like to use that example with tour, right? You see a lot of people using those Hot Metal Pros in those longer irons, and you're obviously going to try something different, but adjusting the length, taking out those long irons and giving yourself more wedges is always a good idea for scoring. Let's put it that way.
Yes. It's funny how if you look at my bag setup and my Loft Progressions, they're not what you'd think they would be from someone with as much access to equipment and measurements and stuff like that. My wedges, I have a 46 degree, a 51, and a 58. So I've got like a 6 degree jump and a 7 degree jump in the area where you think you don't want such big jumps. But that's the whole thing of it's like I've learned when I was getting closer to the green, when I was, call it 100 yards or 90 yards, and I had 4 wedges in there, it's just like too many options. It's like it became where I liked having bigger jumps because I knew there was a clear answer as to what I should be hitting right there, and it helped me commit to it better. But that being said, I'm about to make room for one more club, so it might work its way back in there. Maybe I'll add a 64. Who knows?
There you go. It's funny because I did the same thing a long time ago. I used to do like the 52, 56, 60, and I just didn't. I'd look at one golf club after like 2 weeks, and I'm like, I haven't pulled you because I wasn't comfortable hitting you, or I wasn't sure. I was like, I just hit this one because I know I'm comfortable hitting it. And it's a good thought process for average golfers to. I know we talk so much about wedges, but if you're not confident in hitting a golf club or hitting a certain shot, like I rarely use my 58 that often, just because I know that I can get my 54 and I can hit a lower spinning shot, and I can get all the stuff out of it that I really want. And then when I'm into deep stuff, you get the 58 and it's like it's the extra ripcord on the parachute. You just need it in case of emergency only. So Chris, as always, I really appreciate your time, and look forward to hopefully me talking in person one day soon.
Yes, definitely. And if you make it down to Atlanta, or maybe we meet up at Sweetens or something, we got to make something happen soon.
Sign me up for Sweetens Cove.
Awesome. Ryan, always great. And I love talking to you. And anytime I can help with anything for any part of WRX, I'm happy to do that.
Really appreciate it. Thanks so much, Chris.
Awesome. Have a great one.